Let's Talk About Kidneys takes a deep dive into the chronic kidney disease patient journey. We're here to inspire meaningful conversations and to help people living with CKD gain a full understanding of their disease. Today, we visit with DNA patient Tiffany Archibald, a 2-time kidney transplant recipient, to learn how she maintains a healthy lifestyle. All right, Miss Tiffany, I am so glad we're getting to talk today because your journey is such an exceptional one. I mean, it really is. I'm sure it's not entirely unique, but at the same time, it is definitely one that is unique to you and important to talk about. So now that you're post-transplant, I can imagine your life feels a little bit before and after, in terms of how you go about your day-to-day. And, in other episodes, we've heard from Dr. Corpier about how to identify early signs of chronic kidney disease. And we got to sit down with the two of you together to talk about how that relationship between the two of you can work in order to be most successful and in a healthy lifestyle. But now I'd love to talk about, for you, what you've learned and what has worked for you in terms of maintaining a healthy lifestyle as a transplant recipient. So first, I'd love to start with looking at it holistically, right? Like, what are the critical areas of focus for you at this stage?
I think holistically, first you have to, look at the word. And it's funny that you selected that word because after my first transplant, I was dead set on trying to find the most natural way to maintain, because you are on so many medications. I think I take probably 20, including blood pressure, anti-rejection. I take about 20 some pills a day. And so you try and find the natural ways to do things. And so holistically, you want to try to kind of like, if you look at where we are right now in society, as far as people doing the keto diet and all of these trends that make you kind of look at your eating habits, I think that as a transplant recipient, you have to do the same and not only come up with things on your own, but you have to work with your renal dietitian. So every transplant patient is assigned a renal dietitian. If they are capitalizing that referral, that is where I think the issues kind of come into play. But for me, holistically, I think that, trying to remove anything, stay away from anything that has preservatives, anything that has a shelf life. So, I'm looking at, I eat a lot of fruit, a lot of fresh fruits, a lot of fresh vegetables. I'm the smoothie queen. I will put 25 different fruits and vegetables so that I'm getting not only all my nutrients, but also filling myself. And then you have to, like, an average person can go say, hey, I want to take a protein supplement, or I want to take this pre-workout. You can't do that as a transplant patient. Anything that you put in your body that is not natural and grown, you have to, run that by your renal dietitian. So for me, I did find it's called a pea protein. So that's something that I take, put in with my smoothie so that I get that extra protein, but not a lot of animal protein. So you're definitely trying to cut out that animal protein, because what people don't realize is, like, say a 6-ounce steak, that takes anybody's kidney, your kidneys, a transplant recipient's kidneys, your kidneys are doing the work and breaking down that meat compound. And so just think, the more meat that I eat, the harder my kidneys have to work. And so I think for me, change my lifestyle to being pescatarian, which is, primarily seafood. And then occasionally, because I do work out a lot and I feel like I need that, protein refuel, I'll do some, chicken breasts or a very light protein. I haven't had red meat since my first transplant, because again, back to the fact of the red meat is what makes your transplant work the most. So tons of water. I mean, I can't even stress the amount of water that, I drink in a day. And then you have to get creative with it. So I do a lot of detox water where it's, cucumber, mint leaves, lemon, and just kind of giving water that flavor. So staying away from carbonated drinks, staying away from a bunch of juices and things like that. So those are ways that I look at it holistically as far as nutrition.
As far as nutrition, absolutely. And in terms of the results of how that's impacted you, what have you seen, come to fruition in your life?
I see that when you're when you're a CKD patient in general, and especially a lot of us either have two diseases that are in conjunction with our chronic kidney disease. It's either diabetes or it's high blood pressure. So if you're diabetic, there are certain things that you have to stay away and certain foods and things like that. I have high blood pressure. I take blood pressure medication. So I'm noticing that when I do cut out the sodium food, or because I don't eat it regularly. So if I do eat, say, a bag of chips, or if I go to a restaurant, I can kind of tell if I don't say, hey, light on the salt or sauce on the side, that extra sodium is what impacts me. So I notice that I'm less swollen, like your fingers can get swollen, your toes, things that most of us feel when we eat foods that are unhealthy, but the average person is not going to pay attention to that. But I feel like I am radared in anytime I eat. Not that I sit after every meal like, how is this affecting my body? But I am, knowledgeable on what affects my body and how my body changes. If I had, if I drink some wine, the next morning, I got to make sure the night before I'm drinking a lot of coconut water to flush that out, getting those electrolytes naturally, not a bunch of Gatorade. So coconut water is my best friend for.
I think the general public can be more attuned to how how certain foods physically impact us. I think is something that if you don't really think about it, then it's never really acknowledged. And then once you start to realize it, there's certain foods that really do make you, feel like you're your best self.
Most certainly.
So diet is absolutely your, if we're looking at, what areas of focus. So we're looking at diet. What would you say is another element of your life that is a core focus for you?
For me is exercise. And it's like you just mentioned, everything in society the average person needs to do. So I don't know if everyone is aware of the 80-20 method, but that's pretty much your body makeup and how food and working out affects you. It's 80%, diet, 20% exercise. People, the knowledge of you can't outwork a bad diet. You just can't. So you're pretty much, if you are intaking, 2,000 calories, but if you're on a treadmill for 30 minutes and you're only burning 800 calories, so you just got to have the mindset that you can't outwork a bad diet. So your diet is going to not only give you the results physically that you want, greater than working out. So for me, working out is huge, obviously, because I've been an athlete my whole life. And it's just, it's crazy. I'll still go to the park, I'll shoot, I'll play basketball. I got a bike, so I'm obsessed with Peloton. Lifting weights, that's something that has been a very passion for mine. And one of the situations that happened, I want to say last year, was I did have a lot of protein. I started to get a lot of protein in my urine, and there was a little bit of concern. And so one of the things that I did have to do was cut back on my heavy lifting because I'd go in the gym with guys and I'm trying to, leg press 360 and
get a
things
little
like
motivation.
that. Yeah. So I've had to cut back on the amount of weightlifting that I do because your muscle mass produces an amount of protein that then spills over into your urine. So I do love working out, but I do have to be cognizant of how much I'm working out.
I was going to say, so, on that same note, is it something where you feel, when were you able to start that post-transplant?
So,
when is it encouraged versus when can you actually,
So I'm not one to, not to say that I defy rules, but, I feel like there's a standard, but then also I know my body and I know my limits. And so after my first transplant, that was one of the main questions my mom and I had, because my mom is very active and things like that. So we were just like, how soon can we get in the gym and work out? Because I literally worked out the day before my first transplant. I got some shots up, I was good to go. So then, every doctor is going to tell you something different depending on a person's physical history. But for me, they were like, maybe, 6 weeks, maybe, that's the earliest that we see you being able to do anything. Sometimes it's 3 months. But my mom and I were at the gym 2 weeks post-surgery.
Yeah.
Just, you know, lightly on the bike, the
Yeah.
stationary bike, not doing anything crazy. So I think that if you aren't active prior to your transplant, your post-transplant physical activity is going to be a lot different. So I think it is individual.
Yeah.
But for me, you know, I was ready to rock and roll. I'm trying to, you know, get back and, you know, because that helps you say, especially if you were someone like me that didn't have you know, I wasn't on dialysis. I didn't have like a completely lifestyle change because of my CKD. So I just wanted to say, I wanted to remain true to who I am and my activity and my mindset and how I lived my lifestyle. And I think that's some advice that I would give, you know, transplant recipients.
Yeah.
Because if you're not as active prior to your transplant, okay, you have to have a completely different mindset. You have to say, okay, before my transplant, I was sick. I, you know, couldn't do anything physically. I could barely, you know, some people tell you I can barely get off my couch and go check the mail and come back. But now you have to realize it's like the minute they put that transplant in you, like you wake up and it's immediate. It's immediate. And when I tell you,
Significant difference.
It's a significant difference with, you know, because when we pre-transplant, we'll get kind of like this gray, kind of like ashy look, regardless if you're black, white, Asian, whomever. Like your skin just kind of has this, you know, grayish, kind of palish tone. It's like your color comes back, your energy comes back. And so when that nurse gets you up the next day or 2 days after your transplant and say, hey, let's walk these hallways, you got to push yourself, you got to do it so that you kind of, however many days you're in the hospital, you're getting that motivation and you're getting that, those nurses, they're right there watching you so that when you go home, you have to have that same encouragement.
I was to say, take that as encouragement to build a walk, if nothing else, as, you know, early routine. And, you know, hopefully I can imagine, I think it's James Clear. I don't know if you know the book Atomic Habits, talking about just increasing, you know, making an improvement 1% day over day. A lot of it comes down to habit changes create identity change. If you didn't see yourself previously as someone who worked out, the only way to become someone who would work out is to say, what would someone who works out do? You know, and different, he talks about identity change through some of that. And I can imagine that routine, like you mentioned,
very important,
is incredibly important. So I'm glad you touched on that, you know, and what other areas. So if we're talking about diet and then we're talking about exercise, let's say we limit it to 3, and I can imagine there's a lot of different factors at play in terms of a healthy lifestyle at this stage. But what would you say is the third for you?
I think mentally, you have to have that mind-body connection. So everything that we're saying here is nothing, you know, new or innovative. You kind of just follow that mind-body connection. And so a lot of transplant patients, I know I never took advantage of meeting with a counselor and a therapist and going through that because, you know, I was an athlete and I just knew this is something that needed to be done and let's move on. But a lot of other, you know, CKD patients, especially someone that's been on, say, for example, someone that's been on dialysis, you know, their mindset for so long, whether it was 2 years, 8 years, 10 years, their mindset was, oh, I got to get up. I got to go sit in this chair. I got to go to this facility, you know, 3-4 hours a day, you know, 3-4 days a week. So I think having that mind shift is so important in making sure that your mental health is where it needs to be as far as the positivity, the environments that you put yourself in, getting a network that understands what you've been through and are supportive of that. Because when people see you, especially me, when people see you, they're, oh, you're fine. Let's do this and let's try. Like even right now with, you know, COVID and everything, and you know, everyone's like, okay, it's back. Oh, everyone's used to me, you know, traveling literally like probably 8 times a year, going somewhere like every other month, and I've had to, you know, kind of remind people that, you know, my immune system is a lot different than yours. Like, you know, I can mask up and do everything that's possible while I'm on a plane, but sometimes, putting yourself in those situations. So making sure that you're very vocal with your support system, the people that you spend the most time with, and keeping them aware of, hey, I may look great, I may be in shape, I may,
Yeah.
no longer be on dialysis, you don't see the port in my arm, but I
Yeah.
still have to be cautious. So
Absolutely.
just having that mind-body connection, I think it's key. And then also saying, you know what, maybe it's 6 months post-transplant and I'm feeling good, or maybe it's a year post-transplant. Let me just kind of check in with a counselor or with a therapist, because it's a lot to go through. And for some people, it's a long process
Mm-hmm.
to get that transplant. For me, it wasn't a long process, so I didn't have that time to, reflect and do the woe is me and why and all of that stuff. And I think people always do that. That's had transplants. They want
Mm-hmm.
to know, you know, why. Even though if a physician will explain their diagnosis and
Mm-hmm.
what causes it, whether it's a genetic makeup, whether it's acute kidney um, failure or anything, they still want to know why. And I think if you get stuck on the why, it's going to be difficult to appreciate this new life that you were given,
Mm-hmm.
because it is a new life. It's
Yeah.
a completely new life. When you have that energy and you're able to get up and you're able to do things that you weren't able to do, some people for years. So,
And I can imagine for a lot of people too, it's a matter of, trying to decide, just how much to communicate. And it's tough to communicate when you're not feeling well. And
right.
so you don't want to bother other people,
Mm-hmm.
so, talk a little bit about those communication channels, like for you with your family and your loved ones. Obviously I come from athletic background as
Mm-hmm.
well. You're used to kind of just saying, all right, you suck it up and you keep moving,
Right.
but that's really not in your best interest when
Right.
you're in a
It's not.
recovery place, because understandably, I would say it sounds like trauma. You're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing trauma, in one way or another.
Right.
How do you open those communication channels when it doesn't necessarily come naturally?
Um, Again, getting that professional help from your
Yeah.
transplant team, that's going to be key for someone, but also building a network of transplant recipients or
Mm.
CKD patients. I think that, previous before, being with DNA, I was the, senior director of development for the National Kidney Foundation, serving all of Texas. And I can't tell you how many times we've had patient summits, patient events where you have the physicians come up, and we got a physician talking about post transplant. We got a renal dietitian. We have all these professionals come up there and say, "I'll tell my story," or another transplant or another dialysis patient will tell our story. When the event is over, it's like 15 people waiting to talk to me,
Mm.
and the physicians are kind of just standing there like, we're the professionals. But I think patients want to hear it from someone who has experienced it.
Mm.
Their physicians get them to their point. Their physicians know their numbers. They've cared for them. They've brought them through everything. But if you really want to have that, mind body connection and understand what's truly going on, having a mentor that is, whether you're a CKD patient that may be going to dialysis, or maybe you are a transplant, pre-op,
Yeah.
you have to have that network so that you can hear directly from someone who's experienced it, because a physician can see, 300 patients a week, but they haven't sat there with IVs in their arms. They haven't been, in the situation where they're getting rolled down that hallway and going into
Yes.
surgery. It's just a different experience from a patient who's gone through it. So that's something that I would highly suggest.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Community cannot be emphasized enough.
Enough.
I'm curious, what recommendations do you have for being able to find community? You touched on the National Kidney Foundation,
Yes.
obviously DNA, Dallas Nephrology Associates,
Yes.
incredible resource, but what does it look like on a tactical day to day?
And so on a tactical day to day, as a patient, you're gonna have to go out and find those networks. And I know that for DNA, they have a tremendous patient support, network. It's a whole new program, a whole new department that they have called patient navigators, where it's that nurse that is in that. It's not your nurse, it's not the doctor, but it's a nurse that is key to communicating with you. You have their direct line because, nurses that are just seeing patients, they see hundreds of patients, but if you have that patient navigator, so I think that is, actually a tremendous,
Yeah.
program to have for a patient. And then just, going online and, Googling support groups. But I think that being able to find one or two, even if you're not with Dallas Nephrology and you
Hmm.
don't have these resources, you need to ask your physician. You need to ask your social worker. Your social worker could provide you with a list of, community groups and, support networks and things like that, and just find someone. But I really think that anytime there's a patient summit or a patient event or something patient centered,
Yeah.
you're going to walk into a room where there could be 50, 100, 200 people that are just like you.
Yeah.
So you kind of ease into, okay, wow, like you look around and I'm not the only one. Yeah,
Exactly.
I know for me, when I run across multiple, like 2-time transplant recipients or people that have had liver and kidney, I'm always gravitated and fascinated. And I have 1,001 questions because I'm like, wow, I know people that have had transplant, but too, like
Hmm.
I did feel for a long time. I would say it probably wasn't until maybe 2, 3 years ago that I met someone that had 2 transplants,
Wow.
2 kidney transplants.
Yeah.
So but my personality is just like, I'm like, what's your number? Like, I have questions.
Yeah.
Like, what is your follow up? I even met a nurse in one of our offices now. She's had 2, and then she's going to have a third. So I ask her questions and things like that. So it's just about getting out of your shell. And like I gave you that example, when you are at a patient event and you see all the professionals and they're giving grand and, all this information, but you want to hear from someone that has been through it.
I'd love for you to address what the mental aspects of not having just one, but having two.
Mhm.
We've talked about how, some of these transplants can last, may fail within the first week.
Mhm.
I'm not sure how long yours took, but others, it sounds like could
Right.
be a year or two, or maybe longer than that in the journey. So, what are the hurdles to overcome, in terms of whether it be communication or just how you're handling approaching, a second transplant?
So for me, my first transplant, I had her for 8 years. And so that was my mom's
Mm.
organ. And so, of course, you go in not knowledgeable of how all of this works. You're like, oh, well, my mom gave me my organ and she gave me my original organs.
Yeah.
This is going to last forever because it's my mom. And ironically, with my second transplant, when they look at all, it's a complete science. But at the end of the day, when they look at it, my husband's kidney was more of a match than my actual biological mother's.
Interesting.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so when you're knowing that you're being able to hear from the doctors that they're saying this is actually, from a scientific perspective,
Yeah.
a potential better
Yeah,
match, you're
it's
able to have maybe a little bit more optimism going into
yes,
it.
yes.
I'd love to talk about what do you feel like has been your biggest win, in terms of what you've experienced now that you're on your second transplant.
I think my biggest win is, I mean, there's so
Mhm.
many. I think for me, I know that my transplant journey, both of them are not normal, but also just to have organs that are from my mom and my husband, like 2 of the closest people in my lives, it's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
When I don't often reflect as much as I should, like when we have our kidney anniversaries or little things like that, but just like, wow, like God is really looking out for me that I have never had to do dialysis and that, both of my transplant journeys happen at rapid speed, which is, pretty, unknown. But and I think just another win is to, be able to sit here and advocate and educate and tell my story. And sometimes I do feel like, gosh, people are probably tired of hearing about my story and whatever, but I got to realize that there are people that haven't heard it. I've got to realize that there are patients that are going to listen to this podcast and be like, "Wait, what's going?" Like, she's so. I got motivation from her. Whatever it is that they
Yes.
pull from hearing from another transplant patient, um, that's a huge win too. I didn't automatically want to be this person. Always talking about my journey because, for me mentally, it's just kind of like, I never questioned why it happened to me, but it's just like, God, I was a Division One, USC Trojan. I was a, basketball player. I was a starter. I was a team captain. I played overseas. Like, you just wouldn't associate this type of disease with quote unquote someone like me. And
Yeah.
so that's another win, is showing people that this disease does not have a face. You can't look at someone that walks in a room and say, oh, she looks so healthy, and then see someone else, oh, they look, well, that person that you think physically looks unhealthier than me, organs are probably 100 times better, So I just think that being able to change the face of what chronic kidney disease is, and what a person that has received not one but two transplants and how life can go on. I think that's a huge win, to just show people that it's a small, it's a large, but in the grand scheme of life, it's a small hurdle that you have to kind of go through. I know I have people in different departments, at DNA that are that have family members, and some of them are like, I don't want to put any, I just rather go if I need to go. Whatever my kidneys do, that's going to happen. I don't want to inconvenience a family member. I don't want to put family members at risk. And I'm like, they have to understand that donors live full, healthy, active, amazing lives. And you're not, and a lot of transplant patients, or a lot of CKD patients do that. They don't want to share. When they get that packet of, you're sitting there with your doctor and they're saying, okay, you have, these are your options. These are your, renal therapy options. You can either do dialysis, or here's some packets. They'll give you like 10 packets, mail these out to family members so that you can start getting people tested.
Especially if you're being able to talk about this healthy lifestyle.
Yes.
And what your life can look like. And I think that's what's so exciting about being able to sit here with you today and be able to ask these questions and talk about the journey, is the fact that you still have your mom, you still have your husband,
Yes.
you live happy and healthy lives together.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, routine, an important piece of that, and some of the different elements that we talked about today. But I think that's an incredible note for us to end on, because it's the most important, is you have to ask.
Yes.
And that there's something to look forward to
Yes.
on the other end of it.
Yes, it is.
Fantastic. Thank you so much
Of
for your time
course. This is
today. I'm
awesome.
glad we got to get
Yeah.
into it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in today. Learn more about Dallas Nephrology Associates at www.dneph.com. That's DNEPH.com. And if you found the information valuable, be sure to share with those also impacted by chronic kidney disease. Dallas Nephrology Associates' DNA podcast series, Let's Talk About Kidneys, is provided for general information purposes only and does not replace the need to talk with a healthcare professional about your unique situation, care, and options. Our goal is to provide you with as much information as possible so you can be as informed as possible. Reference to any specific product, service, entity, or organization does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by DNA. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity or organization they represent. The views and opinions expressed by DNA employees, contractors, or guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of DNA or any of its representatives. Some of the resources identified in the podcast are links to other websites. These other websites may have differing privacy policies from those of DNA. Please be aware that the internet sites available through these links and the material that you may find there are not under the control of DNA. DNA shall have no responsibility for the accuracy, legality, or content of the external site or subsequent links. Contact the external site for answers to questions regarding its content. The resources included or referenced in the podcast and on the website are provided simply as a service. DNA does not recommend, approve, or endorse any of the content on the linked sites. The content provided on this website and in the podcast is not medical advice and should not be used to evaluate, diagnose, treat, or correct any medical condition. The content is solely intended to educate users regarding chronic kidney disease, end-stage renal disease, ESRD, end-stage kidney disease, ESKD, and related conditions, and ESRD, ESKD treatment options. None of the information provided on this website or referenced in the podcast is substitute for contacting a healthcare professional.